have 5 identities generated for them, right? So in other words, I think what they are defining is very flexible to allow us to be, have that granularity, right? Now, I think, see, this whole package, I think, based on the modeling and also the work with what we are doing with Kieran and stuff like that, I think there is some probably governance or guidance we have to do is how or what is a unit of a package at some point. Because for example, one of the things that I believe is that a package should be owned by a single role in an organization. So there should be a link to it, right? Because someone needs to approve it at the end of the day. So, but it's also from an identity and stuff like that, that there will be probably, we have to define some best practices from a Nephio point of view on how we consume it. And that goes from one is who is the, let's say, the consumer of it. But second, also, what is the identity and all the security aspects around it. So there is, and that's, I think, what we have to capture in the modeling aspect on how, what are the best practices and the, let's say, the governance around the packages and blah, 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 to ensure that when we build them or define these packages, that we somehow follow these guidelines and rules or whatever you want to call that.
Raul, one of the things that I tried is like I start testing some of the services out of the management cluster. For example, the Gitia, for me, doesn't make sense to have like I mean, in the real world, what you're expecting is like external identity. But what I have faced is like at least cluster API, we have like a tight integration. Obviously, I don't know if try to mimic something in the real world, like having the management cluster and with all the services, for me, doesn't make sense. But regarding your testing, did you test also the separation of those services, like the SPIFFE services in an external entity work server?
Outside of the Kubernetes environment itself, you're saying?
Yeah. So,
and that's certainly possible. Again, we are talking about the granularity part. Yes, it's possible to actually leverage SPIFFE outside of Kubernetes environment as well. And we're doing, I've done it in my other projects in the past. So it's definitely possible. The question eventually is what kind of attestation logic is provided out of the box. Writing the attestation logic is usually the complicated part. And that's why you shouldn't write your own attestation logic. If someone else can do it, best for you. Someone who is knowledgeable in it. So that's why, we need to leverage these frameworks. And this framework definitely provides you, and even for that matter, the other workload identity frameworks provide you for Kubernetes and non-Kubernetes needs as well. But for experimentation purpose, for POC purpose, we are certainly going to consider only the Kubernetes aspects and then see. And the other point about granularity, right? Like SPIFFE allows you the granularity till the container level. But if you want to go to the process level as well, it's possible. But you have to maybe write your own attestation plugins. Basically, the whole point is how can you uniquely identify that process? That's the point. Once you have an attestation logic, the identity framework can be built. Yeah.
So 2 questions. One is, how do you protect this vault, right? Because with all the attacks going on, because this is where you are clearly storing things, then how do you protect that? That's question number 1. The second thing is like there is a lot of interesting talk in our Nephio meeting as well as in other places as well. Like how do you use AI, Gen AI, and some of this configuration mechanism inside the security? Is there any way we can detect things by looking at some patterns and stuff like that? I think those are the 2 questions.
Yeah, the first question about hardening the security solution itself, that's typically, how do you do this hardening? So these security solutions basically have some hardening in place, but you can always go to the next level. You can push the Spire agent and the corresponding registered identities within the HSMs, enclaves, and things like that. That is one way possible. The other question about AI, well, I don't think whatever I'll do, I'll speculate at this point in time, and I really don't have an answer. Frankly speaking, yeah, I need to think more. Okay.
I think there's been some recommendation for HSM type of or key identity stores. We can look into it, but the main thing that I get out of it is we will have something to identify. 20,
Correct.
30 years ago, there used to be a NIC card on a Solaris server. That was my identity, but then VM and hypervisor came around. I couldn't use it. And now we're living in a virtualized, containerized world, and we don't have way to pin it down who it is. And when we're moving intercluster, especially in the cases where a CU function need to be moved from cluster A to cluster B to continue to operate under some weird conditions, you want to make sure that you're moving the right entity.
Thank you, Madhu sir. Yeah, the second point that I wanted to discuss is about handling signed releases. Again, this is a short topic. Unless someone has a point to make, our container releases are currently not signed. Ideally, it should be signed. This is one of the requirements from. This is forget about the requirements from the OSSF perspective, but it's in general required. It's a best practice. It's useful in my past experience to have something verifiable. We have been hearing about supply chain security all over the places. This is one way, and this is the first thing that we need to get right. Again, I won't go into the details of it, but we are thinking about cosign, full CO, and record. So cosign is essentially a mechanism in which you can sign the container images. Full CO is the certificate authority, and open certificate authority, which keeps the keys for a short duration, like 10 minutes. Basically, you sign the image, throw away the private key, and then just push the record into an immutable store where you can verify it later. That immutable store here in this context is record. So that's the transparency law. Yeah.
Did you discuss this in the SIG release meeting with the?
No, we haven't discussed this.
Okay.
We haven't. So there was just a action item for R3 in security. So we just had an internal discussion, but we haven't discussed it.
I think it might be good to
Yes.
involve the SIG release
Yes.
people for this, right? I don't know. I was just looking for Bala, but he is not here at the moment. So
Yeah.
but maybe we should bring it up in
Tomorrow.
the SIG release.
Yeah. Tomorrow.
There's a meeting on Monday or something. Monday they meet.
Wednesday it is, right? Yeah. Monday is.
So SIG release is Monday at 6 at
Okay.
9.
Surely I'll bring it up. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Yamos.
So I think one of the thing is that this same issue came up with SecCom and ONET.
Mm.
And we thought the best way to handle this authentication of the software from a user perspective is that you provide a signed image with a signed software bill of material. So
That's right.
ideally, when I receive a software, I can go look at the bill of material. If I'm interested, then I'll bring it into my environment. Otherwise, I won't bring it into my environment.
Right.
And then they can both have the signature and hashes to be sure
Right.
that you got the stuff you wanted.
Yep.
So I think this should be combined with
Yes. That's
a
true.
signed SBOM and signed container. And the good news is LFIT did quite a bit of work on it.
Fantastic.
So you can have a plug and play implementation of both of these features.
Fabulous. Looking forward to discuss with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I tried to say LFIT already resolved that one, signing and then SBOM. So maybe we can, since we are under LFN, maybe we can have
Super.
them approach.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Very appreciate. And the last point that we wanted to discuss was about identity and access management from this time from the user perspective, from the machine perspective, not from the workloads perspective. So the use cases are, you have a user interface, the users are going to do a bunch of stuff. They need to be controlled using RBAC, a standard mechanism, right? And then there would be external API calls. API calls have to be made from external entities. You have to have RBAC and other rules across that. So that is another discussion that is in progress currently in SIG security. So again, this is a high-level schema that has been put up. There is a lot of discussion that needs to happen. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because a lot of this work, including the workload identity, cannot be handled without synchronizations with the other SIG release and SIG automation with SIGs especially. So one thing that you see here is a bunch of new entities. You see ingress controllers, API gateway, and IAM. The API gateway is shown as optional. The primary reason why API gateway exists there is because if you have to to talk to services outside of the Kubernetes clusters. You have ingress controller, which is basically it's a standard ingress controller through which all the access happens. The identity and access management here is a third party. This could be either internal or it could be managed by a third party. You see a link between Kubernetes API server to the identity and access management. So basically the link here says that, Kubernetes API server will essentially check the token with the identity and access management server whenever there is an API access from the Kubernetes perspective done. So again, all of this is something that is the work is yet to begin, like even the experimentation part. So this is in very, very early stages, but the user requirements and the schematic is certainly there, as you can see. Yeah.
One comment.
Yeah.
So this security mechanism using OIDC protocol, we try to decouple security concern from Nephio application core. So Nephio application should not deal with the security concern directly. So this is we setting up the framework and the standard OIDC protocol. So before hitting the Nephio entity, we sort it out. And then for token management credential, we sort it out. Then we validate it. Then we enter into Nephio environment. So this is kind of a decoupling Nephio from security concern. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Your proposal about like one package per one role. No, sorry. Yeah. So you said before that you want to have something like one role per package or like target-based access control or something like that. But then Nephio needs to be aware of identities and so on. And if you want to decouple here, then yeah, that does not come together, right?
Yeah.
I think it does, right? Because this is just saying who the user, this is basically providing identity to the user, right? So
this is only from the user perspective.
this is just the
workload
user,
identity
right? So in other words, the guy that approves the package is typically a machine or is actually a human through the API server that accesses things. So as such, we can identify whether they are belonging to a certain role in the organization that has the right to do so, you see? So
But
if that identity of if that user belongs to the right group in the role of the organization, you now can validate whether that's correct if you have that. But yeah, both. Yeah. So I think what I'm trying to say is that this will do the user part, right? And then the other thing is the machine. If you have an approval controller, he is part of the group that is able to get access to that.
Yeah, exactly. It's because it's role-based, the role can belong to human user and machine user, right? Point out two things. One, the very specific issue about this slide about the aggregated API server, just to explain to people who are wondering what this is about. The way Porch operates is rather special. It's we usually think of extending Kubernetes through operators and custom resources. Porch actually does a little bit of that, but mostly it actually represents its resources not through Kubernetes custom resources, but actually through an aggregated API. So it kind of users of Kubernetes see just a usual Kubernetes RESTful API. Internally, Kubernetes is all RESTful, but behind the scenes, it's actually implemented entirely differently. So the data is stored on Git rather than etcd, which is the standard storage for custom resources. The thing is that in order for this to work, you're basically proxying. So the regular API server of Kubernetes behind the scenes takes the call and actually sends it to Porch instead of handling it internally. Right now, that part of the code is commented out, and there is absolutely no security happening. So it's immediately spoofable, right? It makes it much easier to install Porch because otherwise you would have to install your entire Kubernetes cluster knowing the Porch certificate ahead of time for this to work. Sure, I'll give you in a second, Liam, but I wanted to add another point about just the general user management thing. We have to take into account that cloud providers have their own user management systems, right?
Yeah.
If you're working with Amazon, with OpenShift, with Google, right?
Yes.
So I think we probably, I mean, we can create our own little universe of users, but we probably would want to
Yes.
interact with what's already
Yeah.
there. So there are some open standards, of course, that,
Yes.
try to support, but I think probably as quickly as possible, we should move to real world use cases with
Yeah.
actual real clouds and integrate with them. And of course, with Google, we'll be very happy to provide the environments to do that. Yep.
That's
We're doing a bit of work to enable that uncommon stat API server security, and no, well, actually, we have a guy, we have a rather junior developer working on this. So we're hoping to put up a Porch package that has security enabled, but it'll be harder to install because you're going to have certificates and all that stuff. We should be sourcing that in 2 or 3 weeks, I hope.
Just on this one, are you 100% sure that the API server, the real, I mean, the main Kubernetes API server is not doing like priority and fairness and authentication and authorization on before forwarding the request? Because I think it does.
I mean, it could, but in our code, it's commented out and says insecure server. So
But
Yeah.
not the Porch aggregated API server, but the main Kubernetes API server. Yeah. Huh. I think it does. Okay, but okay, then.
No, so it proxies it. So there is so it goes to to the API server and then it sends it back. So that's how it works. But so it's actually the real API server that does the job, but it actually proxies it and then the other one sends it back. So there is some glue logic in there. I can point you to a presentation. There is a live presentation. I'll point you. They explain how it all works.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a quick comment. You mentioned something about RBAC, and because we're only doing RBAC here, so I presume, I mean, this will do effectively. You can bring this in over the top because all you're doing is having roles. But if we want to do something eventually further down the road, we'll probably want to say this group of users can only manipulate packages in these clusters and so on, or these edge sites,
Yeah,
which
all
I
those
presume will
individual
then
roles, right?
require us to have some further impacts on the actual Nephio core code.
Oh,
I agree with Tali. Actually, this is something that if you take an OpenShift cluster, you get this out of the box. Right? Because you will, if you, depending on, if you take Google Cloud and stuff like that, you get all the identity. And if you take AWS, you get the whole identity framework with it. And so in other words, this is not potentially something Nephio needs to solve, right? But we need to basically, we need to basically say how to use it. If you use Nephio, this is how you use it, type of thing. It's basically the same or similar discussion with service assurance, right? How far do we have to go? Do we just have to document and basically say, okay, this is how you do it and leave it at that rather than trying to do the full-blown implementation? Because I do agree that identity is, so that user identity and having roles is an important aspect to discuss, but Nephio doesn't have to do anything for this, in my view.
I think for roles, that's fine. I think for targets and maybe multi-tenancy at some point in the future, that might be.
The workload identity that we discussed before, that's an open issue that we have to fix. So there we have to do something, but for this comes
work
out of the box. Yeah.
Yes,
that's the first thing that we did.
Usually,
We decoupled these two things
decouple
first,
is not concern of the Nephio security concern. This outside. So before hitting the Nephio, we take care of that, including authentication and coarse grain authorization. Coarse grain, I said fine grain. You still need the application involvement. Yeah.
So I think while you're looking at it, start considering what are the identities and roles for Nephio itself. Second part is I'm going to deploy, let's say, 5G core or 5G RAN. Identities may be different. And then the last one is I'm deploying it in Verizon environment. Verizon AD integration for Verizon users is important. So you probably want to place a placeholder how Nephio will handle these 3-4 different scenarios of identities.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are the second phase problems for us. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you have someone else?
No, just quick, we have a requirement for federation case. So, either vendor or operator, they have own identity in handling. So we want to federate, not dictating by Nephio.
Get on it.
Thank you, Rahul. This is fantastic session. Really